spend an entire act learning about the Worldstone and how important it is. Demons literally kill every last man, but they leave Cain in a cage. Kind of feels like he's just delaying you, like he's not Tyrael. Because it's pretty clear that this wasn't coincidence. The cryptic line about Marius doing exactly as he was meant to do. Where did they come from? What are they doing here? This is not Tyrael.
What happens from this point on? I'm not talking about the hand-wavy off-screen resolution that Diablo 3, aka the Diablo soft reboot, gave us. I mean right now, at this point, after finishing Lord of Destruction for the first time, what do you think happens? Because we never sat down and went through all of the information we've been given thus far and tried to draw a logical conclusion. And how could we? The Worldstone is literally one of the biggest MacGuffins in the history of storytelling, introduced very late in the game with a definition so vague that destroying it could accomplish just about anything the writers wanted it to. It's a convenient out for a series that realistically wouldn't know what a satisfying ending would even look like when you're dealing with the literal devil wrapped in human corruption, sunk into the bottom of horror ocean. But MacGuffins and unicorns aside, if you were the hero, if you were right there in the thick of it, and Tyrael told you he's about to destroy this sacred artifact, this thing of colossal importance to the world, how would you react to that? Would you think it's a good move? Is it the logical thing to do? Would you question it, at least privately in your mind? Does it make sense to you? Are you indifferent to it? I ask this because if all was right in the world and we erased all of the bad decisions, the firing of Blizzard North, the reboot, the auction house, the shoulder pads, all of it, and we were transported back in 2001 after Lord of Destruction came out, you would still have to make a sequel. Diablo 2 is one of the most successful games on the planet, so there's no two ways about it. You have to try and continue the story, and this is the most logical place to start. Not to mention that, out of all of the events you've taken part in during your adventure, this is the most suspect. Out of all the things you're called to do upon in this game, not doing anything is somehow the most unsettling thing. And needless to say, I have a theory, call it a grand conspiracy theory, about how to believably continue the story from this point on in a manner that feels earned and properly set up. So stay a while and listen as I lay down my many thoughts on the matter. And why bother do this for a 20-year-old game, I hear you ask? The same reason why many people still bother to play it today. Because I consider it to be special, and I've always had an interest in stories. Particularly, I have a soft spot in my heart for stories that never got a proper send-off. Let's set this game aside for a bit, and try to figure out, with all of the knowledge that we've been given in the games up to this point, what happens next. Despite the seemingly unequivocal nature of its ending, Diablo 2 makes many compelling arguments in favor of continuing the story and offers a window into what a proper sequel might have looked like. The first and most understated clue is past experience. History is important because it, more often than not, allows us to analyze the past in order to predict the future. And the history of Diablo paints a grim future because, although our heroes seem to triumph over their immediate foes, history shows us that these victories are hollow. The Wanderer slays Diablo but commits a fatal error in judgment when he decides to try and contain the demon himself, no doubt swayed in part by the evil's influence. Bloodraven, the canonical name of the rogue from Diablo 1, became an agent of evil, slaughtering her own sisters in Andariel's name. And the Vigerai sorcerer, enthralled by the demonic power he faced beneath Tristram, lost himself in Horizon's fortress, consumed by his own hubris. Diablo 2 paints a grim fate for each of its predecessors' heroes. All of them end up put down like mad dogs by you. What I find interesting is that we're never privy to the hero's mental state in either game. Sometimes we're given glimpses, but for the most part, they all seem fine while we're playing as them. It's only in the aftermath of Diablo 1 that we learn just how deranging of an experience this was for these three. And the same is true for them. If going through 16 levels of a twisted labyrinth was enough to break these three individuals, imagine what 5 acts worth of horrible locales have done to these people. They seem fine throughout the course of their journey, just like the warrior, rogue, and sorcerer seemed fine, but they're not. It's hard to discuss themes in a Diablo game because this is, at its core, a very simple story. You're not meant to overthink it. but this is definitely one of them, namely corruption. The idea of this absolute evil, this corruption that cannot be tackled without falling prey to it. There is a price to pay for it. It is partly hubris to assume that one can fight ultimate evil without understanding ultimate evil. And if one understands ultimate evil, one will always struggle with it. But why is this important? Because we've been shown that our heroes are fallible. Because what the warrior was doing and what we thought he was doing are two separate things. Because it's enough for our Diablo 2 heroes to have strayed or been misled one small time in order for the entire plot to change. And since Diablo 1 sets a precedent for this, finding out that the D2 heroes' perceptions were skewed isn't much of a stretch, as Diablo 1 acts as foreshadowing for this. Did we really destroy Diablo's stone? Not in-game we didn't. How about Baal's? There are many scenes you could apply this to, but the best one by far is this. Did this really need to happen? Were we misled? Did we misinterpret what we were seeing? If plunging a Soulstone into your forehead turned out to be a bad idea, then what the hell kind of an idea is destroying a Worldstone? Is this truly the right thing to do, or is it just the hero's folly? Deckard Cain, last of the Horadrim. I've poked fun at various plot contrivances surrounding him in part 1 of the series. Now, I will be completely honest, I cooked up this elaborate theory explaining why Cain would be a key player in the sequel and how he's connected to Diablo and part of Diablo's plans, and he would go on to have a fate similar to Marius's, but after reviewing it a couple times, it just did not stand close scrutiny. There are a few outstanding issues with him, sure, like his ability to survive in a cage for months with no food or water, or Diablo's goons going out of their way to protect Cain while burning the rest of Tristram to the ground. The latter was explained in the background by Act 5, when you're shown that demons do actually have this habit of imprisoning their victims into cages, similar to the one Cain was locked in, and letting them starve to death, possibly torturing them as well in the process. Then there's the instance of Qualkek's men getting imprisoned, probably so they could be turned into engines of destruction allied with hell. And even as far back as Act 1, we see an even more disturbing habit in the depths of the rogue monastery, where various torture devices with leftover body parts are abundant. The implication being that while some rogues were killed on the spot, others went through extensive, horrific tortures before they died.
What nightmarish tortures took place here?
As for Cain surviving with no sustenance, I believe this is nothing more than an oversight on the developer's part. There's no point trying to retroactively fix it by trying to turn it into some kind of foreshadowing. It is ridiculously convenient that the forces of hell spared the one person in all of Sanctuary who could put a stop to their plans. And that's not an overstatement. You literally cannot finish the game without Cain. It's also strange how he gets agitated and wants to leave as soon as you defeat Diablo. And then there's this throwaway line from Hratli.
This Cain, whom you brought with you, he has a bearing of great power, yet I sense no magic about him. He is an enigma to me.
Which could imply that he's more than he seems, and I'm turning it into a conspiracy anyway, aren't I? Anyway, even if there is enough to build a case for him being possessed by Diablo or secretly being an agent of heaven or whatever, I don't know how to work that in a manner that would serve the plot. It would just end up being a scandalous reveal for the sake of it. So, despite hinting at there being more to him, there probably isn't. Sorry. Captain America doesn't care about the rules. He cares about justice and fighting evil. If his moral compass drives him to do something that's against the rules, he will do so without hesitation every time. The same goes for Superman. Same goes for any such archetypal hero. What Cap wouldn't do, however, is obey the rules, then break them, then respect them for a bit more, before saying, screw it, and going rogue again. Yet that's exactly what Tyrael does. Tyrael, the physical manifestation of justice itself, arguably the biggest example of the Captain America type hero. He goes against the wishes of heaven and attempts to stop Diablo from freeing Baal. So far so good. The next time you see him, however, he's suddenly obeying the rules, even though Diablo is holed up in his fortress with nowhere to go, and even though there are several powerful mortal heroes who are setting about to slay him. A mere sneeze from Tyrael would be enough of a contribution to secure a swift victory, but he won't get involved because he suddenly takes his vows seriously. Wouldn't make the best husband, would he? He then continues to take his vows seriously until the last moment, when he chose to interfere again. But it's not just the inconsistency of his actions, it's the actions themselves. I've alluded to it a couple times, but him destroying the Worldstone makes no sense. And I'm fully aware that it's now corrupted by the Lord of Destruction, but fighting destruction with destruction just doesn't feel right. It doesn't add up. Up to this point, we haven't been told exactly what the Worldstone is or what it does, but we have been told multiple times by multiple different sources that it is the single most important artifact in all of Sanctuary, and that it is closely tied to the well-being of the world, kind of like the Pillars of Nosgoth in the Legacy of Kain series. Tyrael doing nothing, sidetracking the heroes, and then destroying the Worldstone doesn't make sense, except it makes perfect sense. Why? Because Tyrael is not Tyrael. The only action that is consistent with an avatar of justice is rushing to face Diablo in the tomb of Tal Rasha. This, in a very roundabout way, is consistent with how he's been portrayed in the past, albeit in an implied manner. When learning of Iswal's fate, we're told that he rushed headlong into battle against the wishes of his commander and mentor, Tyrael. We can therefore assume that this brave but reckless attitude rubbed off on him from the archangel he so admired. He was, after all, Tyrael's most trusted lieutenant, so their relationship is implied to have been one of trust, mutual respect, and admiration. Everything after the tomb, though, is not consistent with this portrayal of Tyrael, and that's because the person you meet from this point on is not Tyrael. It's someone whose goals align with their actions, and their actions are delaying the heroes from killing Diablo by sidetracking them to kill Iswal, putting their lives at risk at the worst possible time, and also by not joining the fight against Diablo. Kain himself finds it counterproductive and a fair bit dangerous to undertake the task at this juncture.
Tyrael has asked you to confront Iswal the Fallen? He must have great faith in your abilities. I trust you know what you're doing. Be careful. You're our last hope.
There's also a precedent for Tyrael being impersonated in the cinematics, which would make for some very cool foreshadowing for this, in my opinion. So who is it? Well, it's not Baal, again, since he's off to conquer the north. Plus, he wouldn't send you to kill him, that makes no sense. However, it's still someone that's somewhat aligned with the forces of evil, but is very opportunistic at the same time. Someone whose main task is to delay pursuers, but who also isn't too broken up if the primes get killed in the end anyway. One of the biggest assumptions people make is that since there are 5 acts, there must be 5 evils featured in the story. And many people speculated that the remaining 2 evils weren't in on this plot, or that they refused to side with the primes and the other evils. Except they did. They were in on it the whole time, and just because you don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. And when you stop to think about it, all of the evils, save for Baal, had only one goal in mind: to buy time. They knew that whether it's the high heavens or some mortal agency, they couldn't roam around Sanctuary uncontested for long. Hell cannot simply just manifest itself on Sanctuary. It takes the presence of these great evils, these alpha evils, if you will, to make cracks strong enough for demons to pour through. And if it takes so much trickery and planning to even cross over into Sanctuary, that it makes sense that the prime directive of these evils would be to remove the one barrier that's preventing en masse demon migration into the world. Both Iswal and the Ancients attest to this, that this is the function of the Worldstone. It is essentially a bouncer whose job is to keep interlopers out. The prime evils sacrificed all of their resources just to break the bouncer. And they succeeded. This act does not prevent evil from taking hold, as Tyrael claims. This act allows it to take hold. It allows evil to take root into the mortal world. This was all part of the plan. So who is this fake Tyrael? It should be blatantly obvious where I'm going with this by now. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Belial, the Lord of Lies. Obviously, it would have to be one of the remaining two evils, and Lord of Sin doesn't quite gel with all of the deception this Tyrael puts you through. Now, I've always been disappointed with the manner in which Belial was portrayed in the reboot. His design is so uninteresting. It does not inspire anything remotely related to deception, lies, or mystery. He just looks like a demon. The Lord of Lies should have a hazy, more understated appearance. You should perhaps not be able to make out his complete form. There should be a shroud around him, partially concealing him. Or perhaps he should be a shapeshifter, a constantly shifting mass of flesh and demonic energy. In fact, I always imagined Belial to look not totally unlike an angel. If he is the Lord of Deception, he should deceive us at first glance, no? So I like the idea of him looking like a very twisted, more menacing version of an angel with a hood concealing a pair of sinister, glowing eyes and dark, vaporous tentacles for wings. If he is indeed Belial, then his role is similar to that of Duriel or Andariel. It is simply to slow down or misdirect any pursuers of the three. Hang on there a second. What then happened to the real Tyrael, I hear you asking? Did we even meet him, or are we pulling a Barty Crouch from Harry Potter? Well, you saw Tyrael. You never really met Tyrael. You, the viewer, saw the real Tyrael in the Act 3 cinematic when he fought Diablo. The heroes, however, never got to meet the real Tyrael. That one's Belial. So what happened to the real one? Simple. He's dead. You really think Diablo, the Lord of Terror, and Baal, the Lord of Destruction, take prisoners? Or not even, do you really think they just tie angels to a fucking post and leave them there? Look at what they did to Iswal. No, of course they would hammer Tyrael's physical form until it dissipated and his essence retreated back to heaven where he came from. Tyrael, from this point onward, is out, and Belial is in.
Olive all in.
Suddenly, the destruction of the Worldstone makes a lot more sense. You don't send someone called the Lord of Destruction to do anything else to the damn thing. He didn't succeed thanks to you. However, Belial appeared and finished the job. Also thanks to you. When put together, these pieces start to form a fiendishly efficient puzzle. It's quite brilliant, actually. Fake a civil war to avoid suspicion of an alliance, enter Sanctuary knowing that Tyrael would intervene and use the Soulstones against them, wait patiently while corrupting the stones, using a how-to guide provided by Iswal, send Baal to shatter the Worldstone, while positioning Andariel, Duriel, Belial, Mephisto, and Diablo as obstacles and foils. And then, once the stone is destroyed, invade Sanctuary proper, by way of Azmodan and the forces of a unified hell. All of it rallied under his infernal banner. Diablo? He was a red herring from the beginning. They knew he would attract the most attention and they used that to their advantage. Diablo wasn't marshaling his forces to invade Sanctuary. Does this look like an invasionary force to you, or more like an entrenched defensive position? Why would Diablo hide himself in the deepest recesses of his sanctum protected by 5 seals and his most potent forces? It's because he's delaying you. He's taking all of the attention away from Baal so that he can go do his thing. But wait, why then would Belial tell you where Diablo and Baal are going, or direct you towards Horadrim? Excellent question, voice in my head. Number 1, because you'd have figured it out anyway, and number 2, because, as I said before, Belial is an opportunist, first and foremost. All the evils are. And if he senses that you actually stand a chance at killing Diablo and Baal, he will not hesitate to sick you on them, if it means less competition for the mantle of Ruler of Hell. Whether the Primes succeed or fail, it's a win either way for Belial. I would understand Tyrael being forbidden to interfere in mortal affairs, but why heaven would forbid him from at least slaying some demons on the outskirts of the Chaos Sanctuary is beyond me. Slaying demons is kind of his job. What about his underlings? What are they doing here? Does heaven offer an internship program for mortals? Do they serve Tyrael? Do they get to go back to heaven with him once all of this is over? If not, do they just sit here and polish the marble walls? If they're champions of the light, like you, why don't they also fight instead of asking you for repair money? It makes much more sense that they'd be underlings of Belial who can shapeshift, like him. And speaking of the fortress, have you checked this place out? Because close inspection of the architecture reveals some distinctly creepy elements, like the statues that adorn each side of the building. Those look more like demons than angels to me. If this is supposed to be an angelic structure, those are a weird choice as far as adornments go. Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls establishes the fortress as this neutral garrison that was under the control of both angels and demons throughout the ages, and so it makes sense that it would feature construction elements from both races. But I can't find any such information in the Diablo 2 manual or any lore that predates Diablo 3, so we can assume that the idea of a hybrid fortress was added later. Look at that. Are those demon heads? Seriously? That one looks like a skull. Seriously, it just feels like Belial went, "Quick, mortals are coming, tidy this place up. Yeah, just put this cheap angel painting that I got from eBay on the wall. Done." And they missed a few spots, a few demonic-looking artifacts. Actually, that looks like a towel, not a painting. The fuck? Lastly, I find it very telling that the background music that plays when you're in the fortress is titled Mephisto. And appropriately so, because it's an unusually unnerving piece for the locale. Perhaps the implication is that the Soulstone you took from Mephisto is emanating an aura of evil so thick that you can feel it, or, in this case, hear it. An alternative explanation, however, could be that all is not well, that something is off about this whole picture. And even if Mephisto is the source of this sense of dread, it further calls into question your lucidity during this act. We've seen how quickly and subliminally mortals can be influenced by the power of the three. Everything about this chapter always felt disturbing to me, from the architecture to the music, down to the creepy voices of the two slightly out-of-place humans. And there's another issue. If Tyrael told Iswal of his plan to trap the three using the Soulstones, why then would he be surprised that they had a contingency for that? If he told Iswal all the secrets of the Soulstones, and then saw Iswal get captured by the Primevals, why would he not assume that the Primes tortured the information out of him? Because he doesn't know. If Tyrael knew what happened to Iswal, he wouldn't have used the Soulstones against the Primes. Iswal acted on his own, without his superior's knowledge or consent, and became an agent of the Seven Evils. The only ones who would know exactly what happened to him would be the Seven Evils. So Belial, under the guise of Tyrael, tells you to postpone your quest to save Sanctuary in order to go face Iswal, expecting you to die in the process. When you instead defeat Iswal and learn from him the full scope of Hell's plan, Belial, as Tyrael, acts all surprised to avoid suspicion. And if you're wondering why Belial wouldn't just try to fight you or ambush you like the others, he's the Lord of Lies. The direct approach isn't his MO. It shouldn't be his MO. So he'll stay in the shadows and bide his time, waiting for an opportunity. And if you still think this is Tyrael, I mean, this guy doesn't even take the Soulstone to the Hellforge, even though it's in the neighborhood. First time he was busy fighting Diablo and Baal, so it made sense to delegate the task in the moment. But him being right there next to the stone, a couple clicks away from the forge, and just sitting there brushing his light wings, makes no sense. It makes no sense why heaven would forbid him from dealing a crippling blow to their mortal enemy. That's because they didn't forbid him, and it's because this Tyrael is not Tyrael. At this point, some of you might be feeling mildly annoyed and point out that Tyrael isn't doing anything mostly because of technology, time, and budget limitations, and that the other NPCs' lines got cut from the game. They're not meant to be weird, aloof a-holes. And to that I say, of course. I'm not saying the developers actually planted all these clues and thought of making Tyrael into the bad guy and all of that. I'm just saying that it fits surprisingly well, and if they were given the task of continuing the story, it's an angle that they might believably consider. And plus, who just wants an arbitrary reset anyway? How lame would it be if they made a sequel to Diablo 2 today, and the premise would be, oh, Diablo's back because turns out destroying the Worldstone was bad, and Tyrael didn't know that, and now everyone's magically alive again, and yeah. Buy our game. No, this only works if you plant a few seeds beforehand and work with the established material. That's when people go, oh fuck, that makes sense, instead of scratching their heads and turning their brains off because they don't get the story, but they're just glad they're getting another Diablo game, man. Sound familiar? Now, I've been rambling all over the place, and I get it if you're not convinced. Never mind the Tyrael bit, you're not convinced that we have a strong enough case for a sequel at all. Well, there's more. Allow me to recite a few lines from a couple NPCs and I will show you that not only is a sequel warranted, it's also foreshadowed. Let me present Exhibit A, Iswal. We've talked about him a bit already, and people are well aware of the chilling speech he delivers right before his spirit dissipates. But I don't think people grasp the full gravity of what he's saying here.
You see, it was I who told Diablo and his brothers about the Soulstones and how to corrupt them. It was I who helped the Prime Evils mastermind their own exile to your world.
As I mentioned earlier, this was all premeditated. It was all staged every step of the way. You're talking about a group of beings so powerful, so clairvoyant, that they were able to predict Tyrael's involvement in their plans and counter it with such precise machinations so as to require manipulating just one little old mortal. That's all it took to ruin Tyrael's entire game. One serving of Marius. For, as Baal points out, you, Marius, did exactly as you were meant to do. You really think they could predict and plan for an order of the most powerful mages in Sanctuary and a frickin' archangel and elegantly counter all that with one puny vagrant, yet they can't plan for a ragtag band of adventurers? This was all planned. We were all duped, and we never stood a chance. And sure enough, Iswal goes on to echo this exact sentiment.
The plan we set in motion so long ago cannot be stopped by any mortal agency.
This of course implies that things might have been different had the collective body of heaven chosen to intervene, but realistically the Primevals knew that they would only have to deal with Tyrael because Tyrael can't help himself. When he sees injustice, he destroys it the same way that an off-season bodybuilder destroys a half-eaten muffin on the floor, with extreme prejudice. This is the single most important bit of text in the entire game, and people just gloss over it without grasping the full gravity of what my boy Izzy is saying here.
Hell itself is poised to spill forth into your world like a tidal wave of blood and nightmares. You and all your kind are doomed.
So that's nice, that's chipper, but you might think, nah, he's exaggerating for effect, or he's depressed because he's dead, or he underestimated the might of mortals. Yeah, sure, it sounds like a disembodied angel spirit would suffer from all these petty things, why not? Except he's not the only one to predict this. You might recognize the tidal wave of blood and nightmares bit in particular. Enter Exhibit B, the Ancients.
Baal threatens the Worldstone, and through it, the mortal realm itself. Baal could shatter the boundaries between this world and the burning hells, thus allowing the hordes of the Primevals to pour forth into the mortal realm like an unstoppable tide.
We're led to believe that if Baal takes control of the stone, he can break the boundaries between hell and sanctuary when, in reality, destroying it would be even better, because the stone's mere existence is what separates the realms, and destroying it leaves you with a broken lock and no key. But it gets more cryptic.
If you are weak, the world as you know it could be lost forever. You must not fail.
When I first read that, I thought it meant if you are weak physically, if you do not have the combat prowess to physically defeat Baal, you will lose. But I think it's more nuanced than that. I think it means if you are weak-minded, you will lose. If you are gullible, impressionable, ignorant, witless, then you will lose. Which you were. In the end, Cain voiced it the best. Baal and Tyrael haven't come here to do battle over a paltry few souls. No, everything is at stake, everything is on the line, and nothing has been left to chance. Fatalism and helplessness are major themes in both D1 and D2. We see humans struggle and give it their best, only to fall in the end. Every single time. And Ormus further hints at this idea of a battle you can't win.
How does one destroy destruction? How does one force terror to flee in fear? You have great tasks ahead of you, Ormus thinks.
More like impossible tasks. Remember what I said earlier about fighting fire with fire? You can't kill destruction with destruction. But for me, one of the most telling hints is Anya, as well as the other citizens of Horadrim, but Anya in particular, because if you teleport to town one last time before entering Tyrael's portal, you will hear some very interesting opinions about destroying the Worldstone.
The destruction of the Worldstone does not bode well for our world.
These people have been entrusted with this artifact ages ago. They are the only ones who know anything about it. And if this decision does not make sense to them, then that's a red flag. The only reason they're fine with it is because they trust you.
If Tyrael says the Worldstone must be destroyed, then it must.
This one I love the most, because it's such a herd mentality, below grass level, yet sincere take on it. What she's saying is, this plan is dumb and it makes no sense to me, but whatever. You kids know better. What do I know? I'm only 139 years old. Why should anyone listen to me? But maybe you don't believe them. Maybe they're too blue collar, don't really know what they're talking about, too low level. Let's ask Anya, the daughter and successor of the chief elder. Whatever knowledge the barbarians had about the Worldstone, they passed down to her. If anyone knows anything of value about this thing, it's this chick. And what does she have to say?
Strange that you say that the Worldstone must be destroyed. The prophecies said nothing about that.
Spoiler alert for Mass Effect 2, but you remember how every single squad member berates you if you choose to give the collector base to the elusive man? There is not a single person you can talk to that thinks that this was a good idea, painting this as a non-choice, a right or wrong quiz, an exam you pass if you destroy the base, or fail if you deliver the base, which, of course, Mass Effect 3 rectified in the most hand-wavy manner. That's exactly what talking to Anya and company feels like. It feels like you're making the wrong choice.
The plan we set in motion so long ago cannot be stopped by any mortal agency.
You're too late. My brothers will not have died in vain.
Not even death can save you from me.
That to me is the most chilling of them all. But not because it sounds cool or because it makes me feel nostalgic, but because I finally understood what he meant. This line is one of the most iconic moments from Diablo 2 that made every gamer back in the early 2000s shit their pants, hearing it for the first time, probably at 3 in the morning with headphones on full blast, but very few of them grasp the true meaning of those words. And Diablo isn't threatening you. He's taunting you. He's not saying,
I'm gonna kill you. Then I'm gonna jumpstart your heart. And kill you again.
It's not like I'll kill you and then torture your soul in hell. No, nothing so pedestrian. He's not saying your death won't save you from me. He's saying my death won't save you from me. Not even my death will save you. As in, even if you kill me here today, I still win, because my brother is off destroying your precious Worldstone, and as soon as that happens, all bets are off. We will all be free to manifest on Sanctuary at will, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And then, you will be mine. You and all your kind are doomed. Diablo doesn't need to threaten you. He doesn't need to make you feel fear. He is fear. The only thing Diablo needs to do is distract you. The single most powerful demon in existence is a red herring, a distraction, bait. And that is brilliant. But if you're still not convinced, let me draw your attention to this final bit of foreshadowing. This innocuous, understated quest. Act 3, Quest 4. the Black Book. In this quest, Alcor, the resident wise hermit of Kurost and one of my favorite characters in the entire game, sends you in search of Lam Essen's tome. Now, Lam Essen was this sage who studied the prime evils and used Skatsimi magic, like this really old magic, to try to predict the future and how the primes would affect the mortal world. He documented all of that into this Black Book. Think of it as a kind of Book of Revelation. If you find it, because this is an optional quest, Alcor will initially seem pleased and reward you for your efforts before delving into the book's contents. If you keep visiting him afterwards, however, he sings a very different tune. This line about the Black Book is easy to miss because it doesn't actually pertain to the Black Book quest. It pertains to the Guardian, the last quest of the act, and you have to have completed the Black Book quest in order for him to say this. You can disbelieve everything I've just laid out. We can wipe the slate clean and discount or debunk all of the stuff that I just mentioned, and it still wouldn't change anything because of this.
Well, the good news is that events are unfolding just as Lam Essen foretold. The bad news is that the story ends in our utter ruin.
Why is the Black Book of Lam Essen like a coffin? Simple. Each holds the shape of our future.
The original design for D3 was it was going to be an MMO.
I am not gonna lie, the first time I heard this, it hit me like a truck. An MMO? Really? I mean, I get what he's, I think, going for. It's more like a comprehensive RPG experience with social features fully integrated. I know that was the goal for a long time because you have to remember, this was in the early 2000s. The gaming landscape did not look like it does today. There was still a lot of unexplored territory and a lot of things that people wanted to try out, like fully realized gaming worlds that you could lose yourself into. I think it's unnecessary, but I get where the desire comes from. But it's not like MMO, you know what I mean? I'm sure the plan was more elaborate than just making World of fucking Warcraft. So it would still be a sprawling, story-driven campaign, it's just that you would have more social features and a more social experience on top of that, right?
It was really our first attempt at combining MMO and action RPG. And so a lot of times those aren't necessarily centered around too much. I mean, there was going to be a encroaching bad evil things kind of going on, but it's a story in the sense of like World of Warcraft has stories. You know, it's there, but that's not necessarily what you're focused on.
I guess the moral of the story is not to put your heroes on a pedestal. David Brevik has always been focused more on the gameplay side of things, and while I'm sure the writers would have figured out a clever way to make the whole MMO thing work story-wise, it's just not the same. Just like the Old Republic isn't the same as Knights of the Old Republic. He also goes on to talk about the plans they had for a second expansion to D2 before they were shut down. Presumably Belial and Azmodan would have been the focus of that expansion, cementing your victory against the Seven. I don't remember for sure, but I think I also heard him say in some other interview I can't find that Lord of Destruction was intended to be the end of that storyline. So given all of the above, it's likely that this was never going to play out the way any of us expected, and that's fine. It wouldn't stop people from musing about what could have been, and it wouldn't stop me from making my silly little Diablo theories, because it's fun for me. And if you were hoping that this video would somehow lead into official sources that corroborate everything I've spoken about, I'm sorry to disappoint. This was always going to be me exploring what could have been, not what was intended to have been. And here's where you guys come in. I'm sure at least some of you have had your own thoughts about this and built your own theories and fanfiction. So please, comment your own ideas on the topic below. If you think any of mine make sense, if you think it's too fanfic-ish, if you didn't even know Diablo had a story, if you think Jamela was the big bad all along, whatever it is, I want to hear it. And of course, subscribe for more of my ramblings. And if nothing else, I've earned my rest from this endless theorizing.